And I had a shout out for Tracy DeLong, so I'm going to have a shout out for Megan and Robin, who are colleagues of our three people who are sitting here today. So good morning, Megan and Robin.
Good morning.
Good morning.
See you in a bit.
Yeah, see you in a bit.
Have lunch ready for us.
Yeah, so Rod's just going to flip our slides and then get us ready to start here, I think, shortly. So thanks, Rod. Really appreciate that. Mary Lynn's going to start us off with our opening question.
I am. So all of you listening, do you understand what physical literacy means in your learning environments? So classrooms, outside, etc. We'd like you to use the annotate button and choose whatever you like underneath the annotate button and put it either in the pink box for not sure, or in the yellow box for kind of, or the green box for absolutely, I've got this.
Like that, like the confidence. I got this.
Yeah.
I also like the I'm not really sure part, because that's an honest piece as well, right?
Absolutely. That's
You know, I hear that a lot because we talk with different, like the physical literacy project, and we'll briefly explain that we're working on in Chatham, Kent. But people say, what's this physical literacy? So I think there is some place for the, what does that mean? We know what literacy is.
Yep.
You know, but putting those two words together sometimes gets to that maybe misunderstanding.
mm-hmm.
Definitely.
Yeah, the first time I heard it, which would have been last year, I guess, I was unsure. And I know that it has, certainly when I say the phrase physical literacy, people are a little confused. The literacy throws people off a little bit. So,
It does.
yeah.
So we'll try and clarify that this morning.
Lots
I thought
in the
you
middle,
might, Dawn.
but lots on both sides. That's excellent. This is a good range.
Excellent. All right, Rod.
Okay.
We can move to the
Clear
next
that.
slide. Thanks, everyone, for your input.
That's interesting.
Rod's going to take out all those.
It's neat so people understand, like,
Oh,
you know,
he's struggling taking out all
Alberta
those.
to Kamoka to Chatham, we're all over the place as presenters, and that's the magic and the beauty of this. So.
Yes.
I'm going to have to go back and manually share the slide again, because for some reason I lost it. Let me go back.
Want me to share it, Rod?
Yeah, maybe go ahead, Ben, if you've got it handy, because the advanced tool to advance the slides has sort of disappeared from my side for a second.
I'll share it, and then we'll walk through that way.
But I don't know why it's not.
There we go. So folks should be able to see that now. So this is our physical literacy session 1, Marilyn.
Why it's not connected? Like I turned it on, but
Somebody's not muted, I think.
Let me get-
So anyway, physical literacy session number 1, partially supported by ACK and Ontario William Foundation and Lamping Kent, involved with all of our people and in both background and in the forefront. We welcome Dawne Clark, Dr. Dawne Clark, who presented to a few of our ECEs back in fall, and she did such a great job, and the people who had the benefit of being there all wanted her back and wondered how we could get this message out in a bigger and different way. And so here we are today. We had the opportunity, we seized it, and it was a miracle. Dawn was actually available on the days that we asked her about, which were today and Thursday, and here she is. So Dawn is coming all the way out from Alberta.
Yes, and it's a great pleasure to be here. This is a great way to do it.
And then we just have our territorial acknowledgement. Do you have that on the slide deck there, Marilyn?
I don't.
Just 'cause I'm sharing, I don't have my deck
So
open.
I need to look at my deck. I have to leave the meeting.
Don't worry about it.
Sorry, everyone. I didn't quite get this part prepared.
So we just have to be on Audible there.
Yeah.
Search.
Sorry.
Do you have that there?
Wasn't thinking. Yeah. Hang with us, everyone. we are getting there.
Actually, I'll do it this way. So we acknowledge that the
Thank
land on
you.
which we are gathered is part of the traditional territory of the Chippewa, Odawa, Potawatomi, and Delaware nations. And I love the fact that and that we commit to the sharing and the stewardship of the lands. I really like that part of the more full territorial acknowledgement. And then we have folks with us here today, Mary Lynn. Can you just introduce those folks? That would be great.
We do. So 3 of our ECs who attended the training with Dr. Clark back in the fall are joining us today. So all of them work next door. We're in the Chatham board office today. So they all work next door at McNaughton. So that made them a little bit handy for me to grab. Plus I know them all because I worked at McNaughton with them. So for several years. So we have Jocelyn Rione.
Hello.
Jocelyn can give a wave, yeah. And we have Tracy Clark. And we have Scarlett Orr.
Hello.
So thank you very much,
Yes.
ladies, for being here today with us to help us out with the presentation with Dr. Clark.
Okay, Dr. Clark, we're ready for you to share away, and we're
right.
excited to hear from you.
All right, so, and I need to remember to share computer sound.
Well, all work out.
Yes, it will. As you can see, we just flubbed our way through a couple of things, so it happens.
There we go. That's perfect. All right. Well, good morning. Shall I just head on now?
Head on.
Sure, you go right ahead.
Good morning, everybody. As I mentioned earlier, I'm very, very pleased to be back. I thoroughly enjoyed my time with the ECEs back in November in the face-to-face 2-day workshop. I was just so impressed with their commitment, their curiosity, and their professionalism. So I'm thrilled to be back with you today and potentially Thursday. Well, so we're going to get physical literacy in the early years, and the agenda for today, we're going to look at the Canadian 24-hour movement guidelines and how that applies to the work that we do. So that's the physical activity piece. Then we're going to look at the definition of physical literacy and how it informs physical activity. Why is PA and PL, the short versions of physical activity and physical literacy, important? We'll look at the framework that my team and I have developed that seems to help incorporate physical literacy into environments, both indoors and outdoors. And today, we're just going to look at the outdoor environment. So when we come back on Thursday, we'll look closer at the indoor environment, because I find that generally that's a harder environment to think about having as a physical activity, physical literacy environment. And then I'm going to share with you next on Thursday morning some of the benefits that we're finding both to children and to the staff in the rooms with children when there's more physical activity and physical literacy. Throughout also, I should say I've got a few slides which I'll ask you to go back to that annotate button that you used when you were marking your map and just some thoughts. It's a way for us to have 80 people participate. Also, the 3 ECEs that we have in the board office, Scarlett, Jocelyn, and Tracy, are going to jump in with some of their own thoughts throughout tonight. I'm thrilled that they're there to share their thoughts. So as we move forward, what is physical activity? Just as it is with adults, being physically active for young children means that movement should increase heart rate, it should increase your breathing, and it should cause a light sweat. And I get this question about what is physical activity for young children. So is sitting in the block corner and building a tower of blocks physical activity? Well, if it meets these criteria, then yes, it would be. But usually the things that happen indoors are not considered to be physically active movements. And why is that important to think about? When we started this work, or when I started this work back in about 2007, Participaction was advertising quite heavily on the radio. And they would be very proud of saying, we have physical activity guidelines for the entire lifespan, from age 5 to 95. And of course, in my field of early childhood, all of the children that we're concerned with were left out of that. CSEP didn't, the Canadian Society for Exercise Physiologists, finally came out with some guidelines for children under 5 in 2012. And then in 2017, the Canadian 24-hour movement guidelines came out. So it's interesting when I speak with you in that you'll notice, if you look down the left-hand column, that the ages between 4 and 5 vary considerably in terms of what their movement guidelines should be. And I question this a little bit. So let's look. For toddlers and preschoolers, 3 and 4-year-olds, so those are your JK students, they should be having 180 minutes a day, spread throughout the day, both structured and unstructured play. But as soon as a child turns 5, notice that 3 hours a day drops to 1 hour a day. And the whole rationale, there's nothing scientific about that. There's nothing saying that as soon as you turn 5 years old, you need less physical activity to maintain your health. It's just basically saying, well, 5-year-olds are in school. How do we accommodate 3 hours of physical activity in a school day? So for you, that's an interesting question as you're crossing over that line with your JK and your SK students between 180 minutes a day and 60 minutes a day. Let's look at that 180 minutes a day for a minute. For adults, we're required to have 30 minutes of physical activity 5 days a week. So that amounts to 150 minutes of physical activity. Sitting at my desk, or when it was minus 30 here a couple of weeks ago, I didn't get my 30 minutes outside, which is where I normally go. But I can be a weekend warrior and I can get 150 minutes on a weekend. But if you're a 4-year-old and you're required to have 3 hours of physical activity every day, there's no way you can be a weekend warrior and have 21 hours of physical activity on the weekend. And we know too, particularly for those younger children who might be in childcare until 5:30 at night, by the time parents pick them up, they feed them supper, they put them in the bath, they read them a story, and they put them to bed for 7 o'clock at night. How are they going to get time? They can't get that time. So that means that 3 hours a day for our 4-year-olds and at least our 1 hour a day for 5-year-olds, a good chunk of that is going to happen. It's going to have to happen within childcare or school systems. So that's the important thing that's guiding us around the movement guidelines and what children are required to have. And then if you slide over into the right-hand column, notice that for infants, screen time is absolutely not recommended. For children under 2, no screen time. And for children 2 and over, 1 hour a day. And that includes what we do in the school system as well as what they do at home. And it's interesting in that a study that we're just doing with a context, well, I'll show you the next slide that will show you that. So are young children active by nature? Well, we know that 1/3 of Canadian preschool children are either overweight or obese. 1/3, that's 1 in 3 children. And if you remember, some of you who are a bit older, we didn't see overweight 3 and 4-year-olds. So this is something that's relatively new. And even though participation standards and Health Canada have really been working on that piece with both nutrition, healthy nutrition, and the physical activity, we haven't been able to change that number across Canada over the last 12 or 15 years. So 1/3 of Canadian preschool children are either overweight or obese. Now start thinking about the children that you have. Young children spend an average of 7.5 hours daily being sedentary, meaning they're sitting still. And a lot of that has to do with the programs that they might be in. How long are they sitting still in circle? How long are they sitting still at a table doing crafts? How long are they quietly working in a library corner or whatever? How much time do they spend in a car seat? So 7.5 hours daily. And when you consider that the average 4 and 5-year-old, their day is about a 12-hour day because they're still needing 10 to 12 hours of sleep, the majority of their time is spent being sedentary. This is the scary stat. Only 15% meet the guidelines for less than 1 hour of screen time per day. And so in a study that we're conducting here in BC and Alberta, Our number is actually 17% that meet the guidelines, but we're not proud of that because we also find that children may have an hour a day of screen time, but 0 hours of physical activity during a day. So here's where I'd like you to go to your annotation. I'd like you to think about how your childhood might have been different from what we see today. If you go back as far as my age, and I'm retired, you know, Mom used to kick us out of the house. It was not an issue of putting us in front of the TV to make dinner. It was a matter of out. You come back when I call you for dinner time. You stay outside and play. What did you do as children? How were you active? So pop up to that top bar and just either, you know, just give me a word or two. How were you active as a child? Until the lights came on, until the traffic lights came on, yeah, or until the street lights came on. Played outside. Two brave souls went to the park. We walked to friends' houses, yes. Oh, hunted for bugs and frogs, rollerbladed, figure skated, always outside on the street with friends. We've got some sports biking outside for hours. Almost all of the neighbor kids were outside. Family skating, yeah, didn't come back till the lights came on. Never, you were always with friends, never alone. There were lots of extracurricular activities, climbed the apple tree, day camp at the park, fewer video games. That's probably our key, is the fact that there were less temptations. There were, when I grew up and when my children grew up, there were only 3 channels on TV. And after school, those channels were not interesting for kids. And so there wasn't a lure to stay inside. Fun was outside, away from the parents, away from the eyes. There's a comment that's interesting, safer outside as well. And I think that's a real concern of people. And we'll talk about that. You know, you were calling on friends, you played in old barns and creeks, things that today would be considered risky play, right? And that was just the way that it was. This is awesome, thank you. Let's look at some of the reasons and we'll talk about those. How do we move on to the next? What's going on here? We're just overlaying slides, Ron.
If we could just hit the clear button on the annotate tool. Let me grab that. Just a second. I'm on 2 computers and I'll just get that out of the way for you.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
There we go. All these things we're learning. So why the change? And safety came up, the 3rd one down, that we need to protect from risks. And this has become, and we'll talk about this a little bit more at the end when we talk about outside play, there's a real concern about safety. And so one of the stats that I like to indicate for people is that children, according to our medical reports across the country, have never been safer in terms of the injuries that they come in with. Lower deaths, lower injury rates. Children have never been safer in Canada. We talked at the very beginning about 1 in 3 children being overweight or obese. And we know that obesity leads in later life to a whole range of health issues, including type 2 diabetes, chronic health disease, strokes, cardiovascular issues. And the RCMP tell us that in Canada, children have a risk of being abducted by a stranger, not by a family member. Now, it's really different for family members, but children have a risk of being abducted by strangers, a 1 in 14 million chance.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah.
There are not abductions in Canada by strangers. They're very, very rare. So we're looking at the risks of a 1 in 3 chance of our child developing type 2 diabetes or later health issues by keeping them inside, by keeping them sedentary, versus a 1 in 14 million chance of being abducted and a lower rate of injuries than previous. So safety protection from risk is a real issue that people feel, and somehow we need to overcome. It's almost like an urban myth. We also feel there's a general lack of knowledge about child development, with the belief that in order to be successful for school, children need to learn how to read and write and do math, and we need to focus them on these things. Whereas one of the things that I'm going to talk about is that the soft skills that we're learning that really are important for success in school, so the ability to sit and focus, listen to the adults in the room, process the instructions, make a plan, complete an assignment, change that plan if it's not working, avoid the distractions of 25 other children around us. Those are the things that children need in order to be successful in school. And research has shown that focusing on things like reading, writing, and math may help children up to about grade 3 or 4, but when they're being asked to talk about abstract concepts, they don't have that, because abstract concepts develop out of play, and play that is physically active. We also have problems because screens are just such great babysitters and soothers. And instead of sending children out into the yard, while you're making supper, it's much easier to put them in front of a tablet or the TV. So what is physical literacy? That's physical activity and some of the things that we need to think about why we want to keep children physically active. And as Mary Lynn suggested, literacy we all understand. What is physical literacy? Well, if you think about literacy, when we talk about it in the classroom, it's learning to read and write and to communicate. We talk about numeracy. Well, that's learning how to use numbers to be able to do math. We might talk about musical literacy, being able to learn the notes and being able to read music so that you can create music. We might talk about dance literacy if you're in a ballet class or a jazz class and you have to learn the proper movements. We talk about financial literacy, knowing how to save your money, how to budget, how to spend your money wisely. So literacy of all those types is really just how do we learn how to be more able to read and write, able to do math, able to dance, able to play music. Physical literacy, how are we more able to be physical? And so physical literacy is a term that was coined in 2010 by a philosopher, believe it or not, in the UK named Margaret Whitehead. This was her original definition, that physical literacy means that you are motivated to move, that you're confident to move, and that you also have the competence. You have the body coordination and skills to move. And then she goes on to say, motivated, confident, and competent to move for a lifetime. And that builds right into what we know about early brain development, that the things that children develop, the skills that they develop in their first 5 years, their motivation, confidence, and competence actually sets the trajectory for what's going to happen for the rest of their lives. So if they build physical literacy in their first 5 years, they're more likely to continue in school, into the sports teams, into extracurricular activities, into independent activities such as skiing or swimming or bike riding or horse riding, equestrian sports. But if they don't have that in their first 5 years, it's very difficult, not impossible, but very difficult to change that pattern of behavior. So physical literacy, many kinds of activities, on the ground, on snow and ice, in water, and in the air. So we don't worry too much about in the air until children get into gymnastics a little bit later on, which is essentially their air sports or their skiing gymnastics or snowboarding, those kinds of things. Essentially, we're looking at on the ground, definitely on snow and ice, because that's the reality in Canada. and in water in terms of swimming, boating, those sorts of things. There's another aspect to physical literacy as well. So just as I mentioned that reading and writing requires you know the alphabet, numeracy requires a knowledge of numbers, there are fundamental movement skills, the ABCs or 1, 2, 3s of movement. And there are 3 of them. Stability and balance is probably the most important. That's what you see babies working on from the time they're first able to move. They begin to discover their hands and they begin to control that muscle movement very early. When they're lying on their tummy and they're able to start lifting their head off the floor or off the mat, then that's a beginning of stability and balance. And then we watch them move from sitting, figuring out a crawling stance, pulling themselves up, figuring out their balance, and finally they're walking and moving into locomotion. And balance doesn't end there, because think about the things that we need to use balance for as we move through life. Skating, skiing, riding our bike, all of those require balance. And now my father, who just turned 93, I'm watching this phase of his fundamental movement skills decreasing as he's losing more balance. And that is actually threatening his ability to do other movements, to be physically active. Because if he falls and breaks something, then he's lost his ability to be physically active. So stability and balance in the photo here is just showing how we in Canada need to have that. From the basic thing of putting on boots and snow pants, and you can think how your toddlers might have laid down on the floor to put on their snow pants, and eventually as they get a bit older, they're leaning against the wall and soon they're jumping into them and out the door. Locomotion is the second phase, and that's the one that we find children seem to persist in more often. They want to run, they want to jump, they want to climb. And those are often the things that we're asking them not to do. Don't stand on the table, don't jump off the bench, don't climb up the fence. But those are the natural things that children want to do as they develop their skills in locomotion. And the third one, and I love this picture, trying to catch with her eyes closed. Manipulation and coordination. So how do we use our bodies then to make other things move? And again, babies start with that. Very soon they reach over and grab their rattle, and then they'll move that rattle into the end, and that's manipulation and coordination. Finally, they learn that if they drop something, usually their spoon or their food bowl, off the tray of the high chair, somebody else is going to manipulate, they can manipulate somebody else to pick it up for them. But that moves into how do we catch, how do we throw and kick a ball, how do we use extra tools in our hands? So hockey sticks, tennis rackets, those kinds of things. So the fundamental movement skills, the language of physical literacy is stability and balance, locomotion, and manipulation and coordination. And as we go through talking about developing physical literacy, think about whether the activities that you have and that you offer for children allow them to develop skills in all 3 of these areas. And as I say, the research that we're doing is showing that stability and balance and manipulation and coordination are the weakest. I just heard a report that children coming into school, their fundamental movement skills, this was down in the US, are so weak that they don't have the muscle coordination in their hands to hold a pencil properly. They're still in a fist grip, and they don't have the core strength to sit up straight in a chair at a desk.
Is that ring true for our folks here?
What age did she say?
What age was that?
Age, Dawn?
That was coming into school, so 5 or 6 years old.
It's definitely some. Yeah, we have a few. You can see the ones that don't have a lot of core because they'll W sit to help hold their.
There's a
on
lot
their
of fist
support
gripping, and
What's
they
W sit?
Their legs go
This
back because when
Yes,
you're a baby,
like a baby.
it holds your body up. So some of them will still do it. So you try and pick their legs,
Ah,
pull their legs out.
Yeah.
And that's, I mean, we never thought about that before.
Mm-hmm.
Come into school totally capable of sitting on a chair or holding a pencil properly without a fist grip. And my son works over in London, England. One of his colleagues is quite a renowned orthopedic surgeon with the fabulous name of Roger Kneebone, which is great for an orthopedic surgeon.
Yes, Kneebone.
But he was saying that one of the challenges, he was actually on CBC here in Canada last summer, talking about how they used to assume that their students came into med school knowing how to hold a needle and sew. They've got great thumbs, but they don't know how to hold the needle and stitch anymore.
Wow.
Mhm.
So things that we wouldn't even think about in terms of coordination come out of the language of the fundamental movement skills. So we're going to try, this one is an embedded one, Rod, so I think we're okay on this one. This is a lovely from Wales who's going to explain the importance to her of being physically literate. Watch for those 3 fundamental movement skills that she makes and talks about. So balance and stability, locomotion, and object manipulation. She has a wonderful little accent.
Okay, the clock's ticking. You have until I'm 7 years old to make sure I can do this, this, and this. Obviously, I can already do this stuff, because I get lots of help. But loads of kids don't and are really missing out. It's called physical literacy. And we need you to help us as early as possible, so we can do all kinds of things when we're older. We'll try anything at this age. So now's the time to help us, before it's too late. Because if we don't learn these basic skills now, we might just give up. We might never discover what we could have been good at, and we might turn into couch potatoes. So fire us up. Inspire us. If you don't, you're asking us to settle for a life that's shorter and less healthy. And we don't want that, do we?
And so she's just done a, okay, so I need to figure out how to get out of this. And I just change the slide.
I think you just changed the slide, Dawn. We had a couple of comments just to honor that in the chat, which is that Dawn saying now we have kids coming to school at age 3, which is different than when she went to school at age 5. So we have younger children as well coming into school and maybe different developmentally.
Yes.
Absolutely, and that's very true. And we wouldn't necessarily expect a 3-year-old to have moved to a proper grip on a pencil, for example. Which then emphasizes the fact that with young children coming in at 3 years old, we really need to make sure that those children then have lots of opportunities to play and to develop their physical literacy for sure. One of the comments that this little one made at the end about we may live shorter lifespans. And actually that's another piece of research that we're finding that this generation of children, so children under the age of 12 right now, so the children that you're teaching and working with will be the first generation in recorded history to have a shorter span than their parents. We've always gone the other way. We've always extended the lifespan. And now because of this sedentary behavior, increased obesity, increased health risks, both physically and mentally, this generation will live a shorter life than we will, which is a little discouraging. So why is PA and PL essential to a healthy life? Well, we know about the physical and mental health benefits. And lots of research has indicated for adults that being physically active decreases depression and many other mental health. In fact, the suggestion for those who experience depression on an ongoing basis is to be more physically active. And we know what it feels like after we've been out in the woods or we've gone for a good bike ride or even a good walk with the dog, how we feel mentally. I talked a little bit about school readiness, these core competencies, the executive function skills, the ability to focus, ignore distraction, process information, follow instructions, and to control or begin to regulate emotion. Those are the things that physical activity and physical literacy help. Social and emotional development, children who are physically active and begin to develop those fundamental movement skills that enable them to be more physically active, have more attention. Their attention spans are longer when they're playing. They have stronger peer relationships because they're out playing with peers and needing to negotiate. They're more persistent because they're trying to play a game, or they're trying to climb a tree, or they're trying to build a structure. They're more persistent in doing that, and they develop more confidence. The confidence that, yes, I can do this. And because I can do this, now I'm going to try to do this. And we also know that physical activity and physical literacy is one of the key requirements to develop resilience. And so if you haven't read it, check out Michael Unger's book, Too Safe for Their Own Good. And he talks about the harm that we're causing our children by bubble wrapping them. That we need to let them face a little bit of adversity, try their limits, see what they're able to do, that those things are important.
What was that book again, Dawn?
Sorry, the book was called Too Safe for Their Own Good. It's by Michael Unger, and he's Canadian. He's at Dalhousie. He runs an international resilience institute. But essentially, he talks about how important it is for us to let our children experience some adversity right from the very beginning, with our support being mediated and buffered by us. So falling off the bench and banging their arm or whatever is an important thing for them to learn, okay, I'm all right. I didn't die from banging my arm. I'm going to try something else. I'm going to continue to go out and be physically active. And his feeling is, I'll give you another analogy for resilience. I really like this. We've talked about bubble wrapping and helicopter parenting and whatnot. But in Norway, they talk about the curling parent. So if you're familiar with curling as a sport, you know that there's one person who stands at the end of the ice, has complete control over the stone, throws the stone, decides exactly where that stone is going to go in the house at the other end of the ice. So puts the right curl on it, hopefully the right weight behind the stone, get it exactly where they want to go. But if they're not quite right, they call in reinforcements, the sweepers, and they start to ask those sweepers, sweep, sweep, hard, hard, harder, harder, because now they need support making sure that this stone gets exactly where they want it to go in the house. And think about some of the parents you know who not only have decided exactly where their children need to end up in life, but are asking you to help support them by sweeping harder to get them to where they need to go. I like that analogy. It works well. The sweepers. Yes. You're the sweepers, yes. So sometimes the sweeper needs to say to the person who's thrown the rock, maybe there's another place for your child to go, and maybe I can help your children in different ways. Anyway, this is a framework that my team, the Early Years Physical Literacy Research team, has pulled together to help us understand how we can incorporate physical literacy into our elements. So APPLE stands for Active Play and Physical Literacy Every Day, which is very much like your play, CK, physical literacy, and you, CK. You'll notice that the core of the APPLE is Margaret Whitehead's motivation, confidence, and competence. So if children are motivated to move because they're in a curious and wonderful environment, the more they move, the more confident they become with that movement. And as they become more confident, they build more skills, and then they become more motivated and more confident. And that cycle just keeps rotating. And that's what will last through their life. But we've also taken early brain development and good child development, practices to look at how would we incorporate physical literacy every day. So we start on the top left there with relationships. And early brain development tells us that the brain of a young child best develops in the context of relationships. Relationships, relationships, relationships with parents to begin with others in their life who provide diversity and support, with peers, with friends, with extended family. And so everything that we do should help children develop brain within the context of relationships. How do we do that? Well, we do that by providing an environment. And in Ontario, you refer to the environment as the third teacher. So when you create your environment, whether it's indoors or outdoors, you want to create opportunities for children. You want to elicit their curiosity so that they come into the room in the morning and they say, oh, what's over there on the science table? Or look at that new teeter-totter that's in our classroom. What is that? We need to be able to provide opportunities and exposure to children. Children can't develop skills if they don't have exposure to those skills. So we need to think of the three fundamental movement skills. Is there opportunity and exposure to balance, to move, and to manipulate other objects? And we do that through play, especially as younger children are coming into our schools, our 3 and 4 and 5-year-old children. We know from child development that children learn through play. They need the opportunity to be actively playing and exploring their environment. If you watch children who've created their own games, so to speak, they will pay attention and engage in that play for 45 minutes, for an hour, for a couple of hours. They're deeply engaged. And that's a fallacy that, unfortunately, Sesame Street, as much as I love that program, developed for us, that children only have 30-second attention span. So we need to keep changing constantly. And some of you may feel like you're a street character to keep children engaged and active, 30-second time. But when children lead the play, when children are truly engaged and interested, when they have the opportunity to practice, when the play is joyful, they'll be there all day. How to engage children in this kind of an environment and through play? Well, as the adults, it may mean that we model sometimes for children. How do we do this? How do we use this? How might we play with this? Asking questions, participating with the children. One of the biggest challenges that we have, particularly with outdoor play, is watching adults outside with children, a coffee cup in one hand and the phone in the other. And they're expecting the children to play. They're not participating in that play with them. And especially as we talk about outdoor play and some of the challenges that children can develop for themselves out there, active and engaged supervision is key. We need to be there, supporting, teaching, ensuring that all is well. And then that leads me back to relationships, because we talked initially about relationships for the children, but through this model, relationships are important with the children, with children and you, but also with you and others in your building, other staff in your building, admin in your building, your parents, others who might come into the building. So again, the relationships is a contextual thing. So the Apple model is something we'll come back to at the end if we have time, just to talk a little bit more about how, when we're introducing physical literacy or enhancing our physical literacy, we're looking at relationships, the environment, play, both structured and unstructured play, but it has to be joyful play and engagement. Questions or comments about that?
There was a comment in the chat, Dawn, about a book called Balanced and Barefoot. You may have heard that before.
Angela Hanscom's book, yes, awesome. That I think everybody should read. That should be on everybody's list. So it's Balanced and Barefoot by Angela Hanscom. And she has started a series of outdoor schools. It started as an outdoor nursery, and she now runs grade school. It's called Timber Nook. And there are now some Timbernook schools in Canada, I believe. She's from New England, but I believe Timbernook has moved up into Canada. It is a phenomenal book. It's easy to read, but she really clearly identifies how important having children outside, having children explore is. There's one piece I'll mention to you that really caught my attention as I was going back into it, looking for something else. But you know how as we were children, we used to spin a lot? Remember, we used to have those merry-go-rounds in the playroom and in playground, and
Yes.
you'd sit in the middle, or you'd sit with your head hanging over the edge, and somebody would spin you until you got sick to your stomach. Most of those have been removed from playgrounds, but you may remember getting on the swing and twisting it up, twisting the chains together and just laying over the swing and twisting, playing roly-poly down the hills, log rolling down the hills. And now I hear adults saying to children, no, you'll fall, don't spin, you'll fall. And one of Angela Hanscom's point is our vestibular system that maintains balance is in our inner ear. And like any muscle in our body, it needs practice to develop. And vestibular must be developed through spinning, twisting, turning somersaults, leg rolling, log rolling, twisting on the swing, getting on that motorcycle, spinning around. That the vestibular system develops through practice and in the first 5 years of life. And it has to be done through that spinning, twisting movements. Balance, again, is something that I talked about at the beginning that we need to maintain throughout our lifespan if we're going to be healthy as we age. But new research that I hadn't heard before until Angela Hanscom put it in her book is that what a healthy vestibular system supports attention. If we have a good vestibular system, we're more able to pay attention in school or at work. So let those spin and fall.
Yeah, there's some themes here showing up. So, I feel like we say a topic, Dawn, and you're just you've got so many great things to share. So a lot about, interesting that now the books have to be written to remind this. But that sounds like a lot more of a cultural piece, because some of the things around parent expectation around these type of activities now are so different. So it's a bigger cultural piece.
Yes.
So how do you getting around those obstacles where you have parent expectations, but even between different professionals, there are different expectations of that as well. So do you have any thoughts on that, the kind of cultural piece of this?
I'll throw out one idea, and then I'd like to hear our 3 ECEs at the end of the table if they have something to say. I think certainly when I was growing up, and to a certain extent when I was raising my children, so I'm in my 60s, parents didn't really watch to see if I was spinning. They didn't really care if I was spinning or rolling down the hill. That was part of play.
Yeah.
And so now I think we look out and, I raised my 3 kids on a farm. And so when they were very young, they had boundaries. You can't go outside of the house yard fence. And then as they showed that they understood that, and they'd be, okay, now you can't cross through any barbed wire fence or open gate, or any field where there's animals. And then after a while, yes, now you can go down into the woods by yourself, but you have to come back when I ring the bell. We had a great big school bell thing. And so I don't know what they did down there. I don't know what they climbed. It was, they didn't tell me till they were well into their teens that they actually had a tobogganing hill that they call Dead Man's Hill. And it was Dead Man because they tobogganed down through the trees. I didn't know that.
You didn't want to know. It's a good thing.
It is a good thing. It is. And, all my kids are alive and well and extremely healthy. Well, yeah. Jocelyn?
I think it's different at school. I feel exactly as you with my 3 kids at home, but at school we have to worry about everybody else's parents and how they're going to feel, and safety and the rules.
I remember a question someone asked me, and I don't remember. It was at a workshop somewhere along the line, but They just said close your eyes and envision one of your best childhood memories. What's around you? Is there nature?
No parents.
Right. And it was no parents. They had us share, and it was interesting. We all wrote it down. We read a few in front of a bunch of people. And all of them included no parents, a little bit more free will, and there was some nature. It was usually a tree. So it's a tree. Somewhere out in nature, usually involving a tree or some type of waterbed.
Toboggan
of some sort.
A waterbed.
Lake, ponds, creeks.
So think about your first one, no parents. And think about children today. How often are they out of sight of an adult?
Not very often.
Very rare.
Not very often. And certainly not with you in schools, right? Because that's the part of active engaged supervision, and you set up your playgrounds and whatnot so that you can see others of the playground from certain places on the playground. Children are always watched by adults, which is why they love to hide. Go behind a bush or, underneath the hill or something. They just want those few second minutes of being all by themselves. And we used to have that all the time as a child. Mm-hmm. But I really also like that advice, close your eyes. And I was given that advice too by a woman by the name of Ellen Sandsetter, who's done all of the work on risky play, or the initial work on risky play. I believe she's from Norway, one of the Scandinavian countries. And so she'll say, she'll be there in the woods and the children are climbing the trees, and some parent will say, oh, they're too high, I can't watch. Well, don't. Close your eyes.
Mm-hmm. I do that all the time. At home.
Well, yes, you can't really hear, but with the responsibilities that you have. But we'll talk a little bit more about liability at the end. Was there anything else, Ben, that you're seeing on the comments?
Yeah, there's it's a robust comments here, Dawn. You've lit it up here for us. I think it's Aaron at McNaughton saying two observations are related: that the lack of play together, and then the trouble forming relationships with friends.
Yeah.
That the interplay of those two themes together.
So a good colleague of mine is a psychologist in the infant mental health program here in Calgary. So first of all, I just cringe when I hear about infant mental health.
Yeah, okay.
So her team works with children who they receive referrals about children, usually from the kindergarten teachers, who are either suspected of or have been diagnosed with autism. So her team then will go do a home visit with those children who've been referred. And often when they go into the home, the first thing they see are parents on devices and children on screens. And so the very first thing the team will do is teach what's called serve and return. And those of you who were with me in the 2-day, we started out with early brain development, and we don't have time to do that in session. But serve and return is the way that children engage with the adults and others in their life, right from the time they're newborns. They serve, they make a signal, they cry, they squirm, whatever they do, and the adult responds. And then the child responds again. I saw a beautiful film. I was just at the Early Learning Conference in Vancouver this weekend, and Jean Clinton from McMaster was showing a video of her son-in-law and newborn baby, grandson. He was 2 days old. So Jean's son-in-law is holding this baby, and they're making eye contact because a newborn baby can see 10 inches quite clearly, which is perfect when you're cuddling a child. So the baby and father were making eye contact. And then the father stuck out his tongue. And the baby watched and stuck out his tongue. 2 days old. Serve and return. Baby watching, baby responding. So serve and return is how we learn to interact with others in our lives and to engage with others in our lives. And if everybody around us is interacting with a screen and not with us, first of all, don't learn language. We don't learn how to interact and play with others. We don't have that opportunity to build relationships. Remember I said relationships, relationships, relationships. Because the relationship is with a screen and it doesn't build the brain. So we do see young children not able to play with each other. Now, of course, children parallel play until they're about 2 years old. That's just a developmental piece. But then they're still very aware of those around them. They may be copying. They play side by side and play with each other. By the time they're 3, they should be fully engaged in their world. And if serve and return hasn't been happening at home, or they don't have that opportunity, you are in the classroom, all the children you have, how often are you actually serve and returning with each individual child in a meaningful way? And if they don't get it at home either, how are they supposed to build these relationships and learn how to interact with one another?
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. And when they're playing actively, they're doing that. There's no screens when they're playing physically actively.
Yeah, I think it's definitely true that when we were kids, there was not a lot of options. So parents have to put on restrictions for screens.
They do.
Have to.
They have to, for themselves as well.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
I think it's more a guilty thing sometimes, though. Parents feel like they need to provide them with something to do, and so that's what they're doing as opposed to going out. They're feeling like I could send them outside, but what will they do? Who's have to play? Where will they be? Where will they? I understand.
I think that a lot of times, though, we think that you would have sat down after a show and then the show would have been done and you would have shut it off. So parents think of that as when they were young, they're going to do that. And then you forget that Netflix will go on for days. So they're not going to have to shut it off.
Yeah, that's a good thing that parents didn't think they had to keep us busy because we knew how to play for ourselves.
Yeah. So like, what are some examples of how do we navigate that in the world of the classroom? And how do we bring that in, that intentionality? Because students come with their experiences as well. Right?
Yes.
So
how do you do it at home?
How do we do it in the school environment, right? These are things that are happening maybe outside of we control that, kind of outside of our sphere of control.
Yeah.
We may have some influence, but then how do we infuse it, or how do we help that relationship building happen?
It's time. It's just taking the time to sit and do.
Mm-hmm.
Play cards.
It's making eye contact. It's saying good morning to them every day. Maybe chances that you have to.
And the word time, we also need to give them time in free play. And 15 minutes does not, think of it, if I were to give an activity now, say, here's the activity, get yourself organized and do it. It would take you 5 or 10 minutes to get yourself organized before you'd started doing the activity.
Dawn, do you remember the brain game? How long we played for, and then our guesstimation of how long we played.
That was a great example. Exactly.
How long did we think we played for, and how long did we play?
You played
15 minutes, and we'd been there for an hour and 10 minutes.
Exactly.
Wow.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Because
two adults playing a game, and then we guessed how long we thought.
Yeah.
And she told us how long we had played.
Mm-hmm.
And some of us weren't done yet.
Exactly.
Then
Yes.
you just get frustrated.
We were frustrated. We didn't get to finish.
Yes.
So if I had just given you 15 minutes to play, which is what you thought you were doing, what would you have done? And we do that regularly with children. Well, you've got 15 minutes to play before our next activity. What can they do in 15 minutes?
Not even worth it.
Changing gears too quick.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yes, exactly.
And the scaffolding of that, like Erin brings out, I think that there's a theme from Janet as well around. So how do we scaffold it? If we haven't had those open-ended experiences, how do we scaffold some of that? So we go from everything very structured in our kind of cultural norms around parenting and child rearing and expectations on both there. Mm-hmm. So how do we scaffold that in to support our students would be one of the questions that I'm seeing asked here.
I feel like a lot of the problem is at home. It's hard. We do what we can in the 5 days that we have them.
The 5 hours, 5 days that you have them. That's right.
It's choosing what's most important and wondering maybe why you're doing something. Do you have to change the lesson plan or routine if they're engaged, if they're enjoying, if you can extend on it?
Go
Is
with
that
the
something
flow?
that you
Is that
have
what you mean?
to?
Yeah.
Exactly. And particularly, I mean, your setup in JK, I mean, it's not as if you're in grade 9 and the bell rings every 50 minutes. You have to go to the next class or whatever. You have the opportunity between your 2 nutrition breaks, your blocks, that can be yours to
We also
extend.
have 2 staff to be able to split and do maybe 2 different things.
Yes, you're in a great position to be able to do that. And so it's, it's taking the clock out of the room in essence and saying, our schedule's on the wall and we've got 15 minutes for this and 20 minutes for this. I mean, I've been in some childcare centers in Ontario now where the schedule is so rigid that there's no indoor free play anymore. They don't have time for it. And I look at that and think, but that's what they're supposed to be doing at 1 and 2 and 3 years old. Like, why are they scheduled at that time? What is so important with your schedule that you need to stick to it? And
I just feel like they need to cover the things, so they have to stick to the schedule to make sure that they're fit, right?
But it's things like
It's viewing maybe other ways.
Exactly. It's just changing your perspective. How can I cover what I feel I need to do in a more free manner?
Observe, you'll see it.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yes, exactly. Yeah. It's the time. It's just giving children time, allowing time, and watching children engage in play for an hour and 10 minutes like you did with the brain game. There were other things we didn't get done that day, and that's okay.
Yeah, you have to be okay with it.
Yeah. We'll do it tomorrow.
And listening to the student, like, Erin also says, like, we have some special learning needs at times that need some more structured learning activities, but knowing the child and the context, because that may be a need for some doesn't mean that structure is the same value for all the same way. And how do we do that intentionally?
Exactly.
With your students really well.
Exactly. And as you say, you've got the blessing of 2 adults in the room, which not everybody has. So it gives you all kinds of opportunities. We'll look a little bit more. I'm actually going to use in the next section some examples from an early intervention program where all the children have special needs, and we'll look at how they accommodate that.
And I think, like, there's a comment here about being requested to show program plans and doing stories. I don't think this is the absence of structure, it's how it's implemented.
Yes.
So keeping an intentional eye can do a learning story in an open-ended environment as clearly as it, and if it's all structured, it might be more authentic if it's a more open thing. I think of the things I see firsthand. Some of the most meaningful learning stories were from very unstructured interactions that really showed a student's growth in many areas, many lenses that we use.
I think the word intentional is right.
Yeah,
gotta look for it.
And I would go back to the environment. How do you set up the environment intentionally so that children are going to engage with the materials and the equipment in that environment in the direction that you hope they'll go? So there's things you want them to learn about, set up the environment so that's what they learn, but they're doing it through their own exploration, starting out maybe with a bit of structure from the adults in the room, and then allowing the children to explore and learn.
And I just want to say, this is one area that I just want to, like, the professionals that we have with our registered ECEs in the classroom just do so much to bring a developmental approach and perspective to the classroom. It's just invaluable. That mind shift that happens in the early years. And I just can't say enough about that part, Dawn.
I totally agree. And that's what I saw when I was there in November, is just how professional the ECE facilitators are in the room. And unfortunately, it's not the same in all areas where the ECE isn't viewed in the same way, bringing that developmental perspective, understanding how children learn through play. Those are the things that ECEs bring to the classroom. And teachers bring their own skills And together it's a beautiful mesh that works well for young children.
I think we've caught up on most of the things. We can't read it all. We'd be here all day.
Okay.
I think we've caught up, Dawn, on the chat.
Right.
By
Well,
and large, we have.
That's a fantastic chat and lots of discussion. Thank you for that, Ben, because we are going to switch gears now and look at outdoor environments. So I will apologize that the next few sections are all younger children. These are all 2-year-old children, and I know that you work with older children. But again, these were recent pictures. One of my colleagues who works in Revelstoke presented with me in Vancouver, and these were some of the pictures that she used, and I was able to put them up here because she used them at the conference and got clearance from parents to show the photos. So these are some of the things that Nadine has in her outdoor yard for children, and I want you to look at the elements of risk and liability and things that children are doing. And she says you won't see any adults in the picture because, of course, they're all taking the photos. But they realize very much the importance of the active, engaged supervision and the support and buffering for children. So the picture that you see on the left, of course, those are just pallets that have been covered with plywood, and they have loose boards in the playground. And notice how the children have the loose boards in the one case with the little girl between 2 pallets, the little boy sitting on a loose board from a pallet to a stump in the ground, and they're learning how to balance and how to walk. Now, the middle picture was one that really amazed me. That's a very heavy piece of cedar. There is a log underneath it, so it is teetering. It's not fixed, it's teetering. And so these children are learning how to walk up and down the teeter-totter, how to tip it, how to balance it. And then from there, they started taking smaller logs and the pieces of the planks that were there and making smaller teeter-totters. And she says they talk to the children, you know, be careful, don't put your feet under the fingers, but the ground is soft underneath. They've taught the children how to be careful and use this without causing injury. And yes, they fall off and lose their balance. But she says, like, these children are all between 18 months and 2.5 years old. And then you look at the little one on the right, standing on top of the boulder. Ta-da! I did it. You know, that sense of confidence that children then learn to do more. They want to do more of those things. So these are young children, as Nadine was saying in Vancouver when we presented, her children between 18 and 1.5 and 2.5 years are now in the playground doing things that older children are doing because they've had the environment, the opportunity, the relationships, the opportunity to play, and it's amazing what they can accomplish. So I wanted to raise this Canadian position statement. So initially, this came out from Healthy Kids Canada. It was a position statement that was very, very well researched. Came out in 2015 about how children need to be outside. Then in 2018, every single chief medical officer of health across Canada, 10 provinces, 3 territories, signed off on this position statement. And here's the important quote: access to active play in nature and outdoors with its risks is essential for healthy child development. We recommend increasing children's opportunities for self-directed play in all settings, at home, at school, in childcare, the community, and nature. So in a way, this is almost our permission or our background document to say, this has been well researched. All of our CMAOHs, all our chief medical officers of health, have signed off on this, that we need to provide more active play in nature and outdoors. And we acknowledge that there are risks. So I want to talk about loose parts, and I'm going to come back to our ECEs in the room there, because I know that you're all using loose parts. And I wanted to show you, first of all, loose parts is sort of the thing. And we're now realizing across the country that having an expensive play structure in the playground that requires a safe fall surface, expensive to put up, expensive to maintain, often closed during the months of winter when the ground is frozen underneath them, is not required in anybody's legislation. Nobody is required to spend the money to put up a fixed play structure. And in fact, the city of Calgary started looking at their fixed structure playgrounds and realized children weren't using them. It was a waste of money, both to put them up, to maintain them. So 3 years ago, they started a pilot program. They're mobile adventure playgrounds. They got a van, couple of trained recreation facilitators, filled it with junk. And now every summer, through the summer months, they go to a playground every day. They let the kids in the neighborhood know when they're going to be there. And you can see in these pictures how many children there are, the kinds of things they're doing. And playgrounds in Calgary, when the Adventure Mobile Playground comes up, arrives in the playground, kids are there. And you'll notice some parents kind of hovering in the background of some of these pictures or participating in some of the pictures and the great activities that children have. And the city of Calgary was able to address the issue of liability without any problems, which is really interesting. So this one, and we'll see how we do here. I have to go out of my PowerPoint slide and then into this video. I couldn't embed this video because it's part of an online article. It comes out of Australia, at Macquarie, and the video was posted just at the beginning of all the brush fires. So it was last fall that they posted it, and it just amazed me when I was putting it up again to think that they're still dealing with their fires months later. But essentially what happens in this video is that a couple of researchers call together a group of neighborhood people, families. So the parents are there, the children are there, they don't necessarily know each other, they don't necessarily go to the same school. And they fill the playground with loose parts. So this one, because of the accents and the children, has captioning across the bottom. So, now I need to go back. Whoops, let's see. I need to go back in and share. And whoops, I need to share. Good. All right. Okay, so here we go. Are playgrounds too safe?
There are no playgrounds that you can actually enjoy when you've passed kindy.
What I'm going to propose is an afternoon of unstructured, largely unsupervised, and quite possibly unsafe play. It might look a mess, but in fact this represents a revolution in play, loose parts play. In Europe and New Zealand, where schools have adopted loose parts, it's claimed the kids have become more attentive, sociable, even more punctual, and injuries are rare. They're beginning to use what's known as divergent problem solving, reinventing the equipment as a fort, a crime scene,
I'm a witness. Can I be a witness?
who knows what.
Yeah, but it's not yours.
This is a crucial problem-solving skill needed in adult life.
And there's some research that indicates that in the past 20 years, actually creativity has dropped in children. So even though IQ has gone up with education, then this really fosters a lot of creativity.
Yeah, I'm going to rip it out.
And the kids, who were all strangers, are forming alliances. It looks wild, with the potential to really hurt themselves.
Do you want me to help you? Can I have this? To keep me safe. Looks a bit risky.
But as they play, something remarkable begins to happen.
Now they've moved that mat under where they're climbing the tree.
So they are actually quite good at mitigating their own risk.
Yeah. They've got to come up with their own rules and negotiate with people. And this is something that children often don't get the opportunity to do. So often the rules are created by adults.
You need a person to hold. I don't need help.
Yes, I kind of had a bit of a moment there where I was a bit on the edge of my chair when she was trying to get into the hammock. I guess it was a lesson for me to sit back and go, well, actually, she's okay. And she's not going to learn to figure this stuff out if I'm there to catch the fall all the time.
I recommend the safety helmet.
We always assume that risk is negative, but it's not. As they go on in life, they're going to be faced with so many challenges. And if they start at a young age to never know what their boundaries are and to stop themselves and think of the risk first before they ever find out what they're capable of, they won't give themselves the full opportunity to live a life that they want to lead.
There are no playgrounds that you can actually
How do I
enjoy.
do that? Can you help me here? I need to stop that. All right.
You're doing awesome, Dawn. That was great. Management of different files. So now you just want to go back and share that presentation.
Nope, I want to go back into, not that one, but that one. Okay, there we go. All right. Rod was a great tutor yesterday. So I'm looking at the time and thinking I've got a couple of other things I want to do here. So rather than to spend too much time having you annotate this, I just want you to think about what are the loose parts that you might have outside. And I'm also going to suggest, if you're interested, there is a fantastic video. It's about 18 minutes long called The No Rules School down in New Zealand. And he was one of the first principals who literally took out the rules from the playground. And so I think you'll find that it's a little bit, it's a very different approach, but notice the benefits that they talked about in terms of the relationships that the kids built, the way they began to cooperate with one another, the way they made their own rules and established some safety. They were mitigating their own risk. They recognized that there was risk. We need a safety helmet. And so the colander went on their head and they moved the mat under the tree. So they're aware of risk. They don't want to get hurt either. And they're thinking about how they can manage their own risk and mitigate it. So it just allows for that creativity. Interesting that while IQ has gone up, creativity has gone down. And we think of the blossoming tech sector in our country right now. If we don't have originality and creativity, how are our children going to thrive in the new environment when they're ready to start work? So think about the loose parts that you do have outside and what you maybe would like to add. And the advantage to loose parts is that they're cheap. And when they start to break down, you don't mind throwing them out. And then you just put a call out for more loose parts.
So Dawn, there was a couple of comments about liability.
Yes.
That was a thread running through the chat. So a few things is what I'm also hearing you say is start in some place. And by incorporating some loose parts, that can be a way to begin that process. There'll always be navigating those health and safety concerns and liability pieces. But, you know, those things can stop us from any movement forward, but maybe some movement forward is maybe some of those, starting to introduce some of those loose parts, Dawn.
And that's exactly right, Ben. I mean, start slowly, begin to, you know, add a few things, see how the children are using them. What else might fit with that? And as the children develop the skills to manage this more free play, then they're able then to start to build their own competence in managing that kind of free play. And just as I did with my children when I gradually extended boundaries on the farm, they had to show me that I could trust them with the kind of play that they were doing and the way they were going to manipulate equipment. And so if I saw a play that wasn't appropriate, then we needed to take that equipment away for a while until the children could show me that they knew how to use it properly without harming one another.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Common sense. I tend to look at it as a parent's perspective, so I don't know if that's what you want, but I have 3 kids, and as a parent, I would rather get a call that someone broke their arm playing outside than that they watched a movie in the afternoon in their class.
Absolutely.
Everyone knows that about me.
Well, and if you look at the little girl, the really blonde little one on the right, hopping from stump to stump, that's my granddaughter.
So, Dawn, you're not sharing your screen. We'd love to see that.
Oh, shoot. So what have I done wrong here?
You haven't done anything wrong. We're just emerging into your slides. That's all.
Just going back to sharing your slides.
Oh, I can't. Okay, there.
You're doing way better than I would do, Dawn. Good job.
Now are we sharing? And I need to put it on.
Now you're sharing. There it is.
There we go. There we go.
Is it coming back up as the full? There we go. Okay. So this little blondie on the right, she's my granddaughter, and she has broken that left arm twice, once at childcare and once in for her school reception, which started when she was 4 years old. And her parents are just, you need to let her be active. She's a very active child. She can't learn unless she's active. And the school tried to shut her down after she broke her arm, and she literally couldn't continue anymore in school because she needed that activity in order to focus her little brain. And it was really hard for the school because they saw this as liability. She broke her arm at school, you know, and the parents are saying, but we say it's okay. She needs to go to gym class. You need to let her out for recess. She has to do those things or she can't learn. And so it really is a conversation, I think, between parents and the school, and making sure that parents understand what you're doing, you're communicating what you're doing, and children have the opportunity then.
Would you not say as administrators that parents would be happier to get that call, or no?
Not at all.
Not all.
Not
I
at
know
all.
not all.
And so, like, you know, messy is also something.
I know.
About, right? Muddy is a thing. But I think that's where it's like the scaffolding those slow steps, because it's about, because I think that sometimes we try to label it as, well, all parents think this, or all admin thinks this, or all teachers think this, or all ECs think this. Where the truth is, it's a lot more gray in all these overlaps, and not everyone has that uniform idea. Right. It's how do you bring that forward? Because some folks love, like I'll tell you, my lovely and talented wife and I think very differently about the mud coming home on things. I'm like, if they're muddy, it was a good day. What's the problem, right?
Yeah, they had fun.
They had fun. There was lots of good that happened there, but that's a different.
Some of that muddy feedback's come full circle.
I don't like mud either.
I think there's something I think we have to be careful of thinking it as we think of all one group thinks one way, which is that, like the example Dawn just shared, like that was want for more play and want for more of those experiences. Right. So I think it really is. That's why I think Dawn's saying that conversation is really important.
Yes.
So every time I had engaged with that, specifically these parents with different views, either way, it was about how do we engage in the conversation? How are we going to move that forward? Because we know it's good for kids to have these type of experiences. Unfortunately, we can't just say tomorrow, well, it's going to be all fixed and they'll support it 100% either way. But
but
that's how we
start a conversation.
That's how I thought about it.
I think of it, Ben, a little bit like our math conversations. It's not unlike that, where we struggle a little bit with perhaps our families who had math in a certain way and believe that that's the way it should be done. And we can't, and it's not an all or nothing. It's the same thing as this risky play. You can't go full out into the other without having made some steps along the way.
Exactly.
We need to educate people and understand our research too, so that we can actually quote it and speak intelligently about it. So,
and we appreciate the effort that's done each and every day.
Yes,
with folks working with kids, working with parents. That's for that relationship. That's where that begins to change those perspectives.
And I think it needs to be a philosophy of your program. Yeah. I think you need to be able to make sure that everybody in the school buys into that philosophy and can articulate that. I'm doing this because here's how it will support your child's learning and growth and healthy development. And then you need to demonstrate that you're on top of this, that you can explain everything you've put out in the playground. You can explain everything that the children are doing and how you're buffering and supporting and teaching children to be safe using those things. And I think it's that whole process. So that and then the documentation. So the learning stories that you write, the documentation that you put up in your hallways, the things you send home to parents, all showing, look what the children learned today. Look what they discovered. Here's how they did it. Here's how we kept them. Here's how we managed the risks. We didn't eliminate risks. When there's a difference between eliminating and managing. So on a playground that's up on your screen now, managing or eliminating the risks would be doing a scope around this playground and making sure there's no broken glass or needles or whatever. Those need to be dealt with. But the rest of the risks, we're going to manage. Because children need risks in order to build their confidence and competence and resilience. They need those risks. So this is just an example of a nature-based playground that went up last summer in Revelstoke. It's a beautiful location in that it's in a central hub. You'll notice if you look hard enough, there's a fixed structure in the back there, and the children are no longer using it, so it's coming down this spring. But this particular hub is the school can use it, the elementary school, there's a childcare in the school, there's some the same ideas, an early on center there, and public health is also in the same area, and so it's a beautiful hub. So I'm noticing the time, and so we're just gonna skip through a few things. This is the one piece I wanted to leave you with, the thought that a lot of people say, well, we can't spend that much time outside because we have so many things to learn that we have to do inside. So we have to do our reading inside. We have to do our math inside. We have to do our science inside. And so Jackie Koval is a teacher in the 100 Voices program in Edmonton Catholic Schools. They run a program for diagnosed children, 3 and 4 years old. They run it with a teacher and an early childhood educator in each classroom. They're the only ones in the province of Alberta who put those two together. And Jackie now is to the point where she spends her entire day outside. These are all children with diagnosed special needs, most of them autism, fetal alcohol syndrome, and behavior challenges. She starts at the beginning of the year by taking them outside for an hour. And she takes them outside at the very beginning of the day so that the parents are responsible for dressing the children for the weather. They don't even come inside. They stay outside. Now she stays outside for the full day. They eat outside, they do their reading outside, their writing outside, their math. She said the science is amazing that they can do outside. And so what she finds is that physical literacy encompasses physical, cognitive, social, and emotional wellness. And that's a big focus for her because these children have special needs. We take our time stopping to notice buds and leaves blossoming, balancing on fallen trees, running up and down hills, and climbing trees. And in case you're wondering, that figure under the snow on the left is E. And then, being outside brings our lessons to life. Fresh air calms the children and the teachers too. So I've put the link up there. If you go to activeforlife.com, Jackie's article is up there about how she manages playing outside with the children and covering the required curriculum that she has being a part of Edmonton Catholic Schools. And this program of early intervention is called 100 Voices after the Reggio approach of 100 languages of children. So I want to leave you with this idea that if we, and one of you mentioned intentionality earlier, that being outside, if we intentionally plan for learning outside, rather than just running and playing, which is what a lot of people think the outside is for. If we think about how we can teach outside, then we can also get past some of those, I've got the schedule, I have this curriculum I need to teach. And that's basically our time, other than a few last comments or questions.
Absolutely. So if you have any questions, please type them in the chat. We can bring them in. But any other thoughts from our...
I just think with that intentionality piece, it always amazes me when I think I'm putting out an activity, the direction the children will take it. It's not always where I think we're going. They usually take us right or left instead of straight down the path, and I love that.
Yeah. But you're open to that, right? And sometimes it's hard for some teachers to let go of the control of where the activity goes. That's sometimes a little frightening.
Well, yes.
And I think it comes with experience and confidence among the teachers as well, and the ECEs.
Yes.
That's the fun of it too, because that's the observation point where you can see what they're into, and then
Yeah.
what can I bring in tomorrow?
Exactly.
Add to it.
Yes. Yes.
You relax a little bit. It's easier than what.
It's almost better to be a little bit lazy. Let's sit back,
relax a little bit more, and
stop
watch,
cleaning
observe.
everything in. Yeah.
Allow the children to lead the play at times, to lead their own learning as well. And that's what Jackie says with taking the time to stop and notice. She finds out what the children are interested in, and then she can develop whole science units about the bug eggs that are hatching in the tree, or the way that the ice is melting on the sidewalk that they're walking over.
Or the way the frozen ice suddenly melts and you go up to your knees in water.
Lansdowne jumping in on chat, maybe starting small, nurturing success and growing it. The adults follow the motivation, the confidence and competence path too.
Yes.
Exactly. That's a really good point. I like that.
Dawn, can you just maybe stop sharing, and then I'll share the last couple slides?
I can do that.
Any other thoughts from our team here, or anyone?
I had one just from the quote, I can't remember who it was from, Canada, about young children needing to be outside, that you shared, Dawn. And I have 6 grandchildren from the ages of 7 and down, so I'm right in this whole range, right? Like 2 or 2, 2 or 2, 1 is 3, and I think, like, as I've watched them, they almost beg to be outside. Like, they want it. They as little kids, they want to be outside, and then when they are outside, they're happier. And
I don't think it stops at 7. I have
no,
an 11-year-old.
Oh no,
too.
I'm just saying those are the ages of my, but that was for really little kids, and it's there. Like, the kids want it. So if you feed what they're asking for, almost it happens.
Yes.
Remove the walls.
Yeah.
Well, what a morning. From Chatham to across our district and Sarnia and Lambton, all the way to across the province. We have folks chiming in from all across our province, all the way to Alberta. My goodness. We do really value, we want to hear what people think of the session and how we can make it better. We're trying to keep trying these different models of ways to bring people information and sharing and learning. So if you go to tinyurl.com/PL1-2020, that will get you a survey we'd love you to fill out. Also an opportunity there if you'd like a certificate for maybe some professional learning credits, put that in there, and then we can provide that. We'll have our secretary for program, Carolyn Stevens, does a great job getting those out to you. So we'll do that. So please do that sooner than later, because we're another one of these coming up Thursday. Same time, same channel. So please come on back. We're so excited that Dawn, thank you. Your examples and your sharing with us was so clear and was grounded in research, but also grounded in practicality. So we really appreciate you being willing to try something new. Speaking of risky play, this is called risky presenting.
Yes,
this is our first time.
Yes.
I had a great tutor. Thanks, Rod.
And Scarlett and Tracy and Jocelyn, you bring so much to the table and so many conversations. So thank you for being willing to do this. This is a little nerve-wracking when you're doing this, but we appreciate that. And everyone who's taken part, thank you Thank you so much. You weren't able to get in with that link? Oh boy.
Yeah, I just saw that chat too.
Yeah, so tinyurl.com/PL1-2020. I don't know. Survey no longer available. Well, that's unfortunate. I'll make sure I fix it. If not, I'll send for everybody internally. I'll send an email to our system with that stuff. So, anyways, thank you, everybody. Any last thoughts, Marilyn?
I have none, Ken. Thank you, though. Thanks to everyone, our panel, and to Dawn and to Rod, who helps us with everything in the background. We are so appreciative of you, Rod, as well.
So we'll stop recording, and then we will post this a little later today.